On today's show, it's going to be simple. We're going to have a two-round mock draft with plenty of crazy trades. I want to preface, but if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We just hit 16,000. We're on the road to 17, but let's get into it. All right, starting off here, I'm going to have the Bears trading. No, I'm just joking. Please don't click off the video quite yet. We're going to have some trades here. I think 3 or 4 here throughout the entirety of these 2 rounds. But Caleb Williams, number 1, I'm not going to waste your time. At number 2, it is more of a question. I definitely am on the bandwagon of Drake May over a guy like Jayden Daniels, but I understand the schematic fit and the history of a guy like Cliff Kingsbury, having history with Caleb Williams and Kyler Murray, more mobile quarterbacks, which would fit the bill of Jayden Daniels. However, I'm going to go with Drake May here, and that leads me to a very interesting selection at number 3. Now, I will say this. If you want me to go chalk, if you want me to do what every other mock draft does, I could go with Jayden Daniels here. However, hear me out. I think at 34, the Patriots can still get their 4th quarterback on the board or their 5th quarterback on the board, right? A guy like Penix or Bo Nix. So in my opinion, I think if you go with a talented generational level wide receiver in Marvin Harrison, I think that could be huge for your offense and give you a number 1 wide receiver. Really something you haven't had, a dominant wide receiver 1 since Randy Moss. I mean, you can argue Julian Edelman, but he wasn't as dominant as a guy like Randy Moss. And of course, Marvin Harrison could be on that level. I think just having that number 1 guy could be huge for you for the next 10 to 15 years. You've seen how it transformed an offense like Minnesota. So I'm going to go with Marvin Harrison, switch it up today. Of course, I've went with Jayden Daniels every single time, but Marvin Harrison, gives us a different perspective on how draft night could go. At number 4, the Arizona Cardinals are here, and hey, they don't need Jayden Daniels, right? They got their quarterback. So let's trade down. But who are they going to trade down with? Well, there's a coach out there in the AFC West that has a connection, a collegiate connection to Jayden Daniels. That is the coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. So in this scenario, I'm going to have the Raiders trading their 1st round pick, their 2nd round pick, and of course, there might be some other 1st round picks down the line. But Arizona, they have a lot of holes to fill. So my rationale is that they trade this pick, get more draft capital, and you see now they have 4 picks in the first 2 rounds. So they can pick up an extra 2nd round pick along the way and probably a 1st in the future. But the Raiders are aggressive. They trade up and they get Jayden Daniels, of course. They have some other holes to fill, but let's start off with getting their quarterback, a guy who's a little bit raw, he has a lot of untapped potential, but now he can learn from Gardner Minshew for the next year or so before he takes over. Who knows? Maybe by week 4, he's already the starting guy. For the LA Chargers, again, they're in a situation where they could go Neighbors, they could go Roma Dunze, or they could go Joe Alt, but they're also in a position, just like the Cardinals, where they have a lot of holes to fill. So we're going to be doing the typical, the trade that you see in every single mock draft. We're going to be having the Chargers, if I can click on it. They're going to trade down with the Minnesota Vikings, right? And of course, the Chargers trade down for either another tackle or another weapon down the board. The Minnesota Vikings trade up for who they believe can be their quarterback. And then in this case, of course, is J.J. McCarthy. So J.J. McCarthy goes here to the Minnesota Vikings. It is your hypothetical, your typical scenario, but that's what's going to happen here in today's video. So 4 quarterbacks in the top 5. That's just the power of the quarterback position here in today's sports. At number 5, we're going to keep it simple, or at 6, rather, excuse me. Malik Neighbors, the Giants desperately need a number 1. As much as I love Wan'Dale Robinson, he's not a number 1 at the NFL level, but Wan'Dale's such a special player. Hopefully they can untap his potential here, get him the ball a little bit more here in 2024. At number 7, we can sleep through this. Joe Alt to the Titans. They need a tackle for who they believe is their franchise guy. And who knows, if Will Levis comes into next year and he sucks and he's not what he's advertised to be, you can line yourself up for a Shedeur Sanders or whoever the next big quarterback is in 2025. So Joe Alt is your franchise guy for the next 10 to 12 years at the left tackle position. At number 8, the Atlanta Falcons. I flirted with the idea of maybe trading this pick, but, I'm going to say, hey, Raheem Morris is a defensive guy. They need help up front. So really, what edge do you prefer? I think the Atlanta Falcons prefer Dallas Turner. At least that's kind of one of the worst kept secrets here in the NFL. So I'm going to say, hey, they addressed the defensive line a great amount here in this 2-round mock. So stay tuned for pick 43. At number 9, the Chicago Bears are here, and hey, they could go with a tackle, right, to protect their guy. But I think they're rumors right now are they're not going to address tackle here in the top 10. They're okay with what they have at the moment. So I think they might just take a flyer on a guy in rounds 3 or later. So with that being said, for today's video, I think we either attack Rome Odunze, having a trio of Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze sounds nasty. That sounds unstoppable if Caleb Williams is the real deal, which he should be from day one with all those weapons. That sounds unstoppable. But I do think with the Keenan Allen trade, it does give them the flexibility to attack the defensive front of this ball, or the defensive front. Of course, in a division where you have talented quarterbacks like Jordan Love, Jared Goff, and now JJ McCarthy, you want to put pressure on those guys. So it really comes down to Jared Verse or Latu. And I'm a Latu guy. If you know anything about the channel, I think he is the number 1 edge in the class. But of course, that is a debate in its own right. But at number 10 here, the New York Jets, they are in an interesting situation. I think right now they could say, hey, we could go get Rome Odunze, go, have another wide receiver trio. But again, they also have guys like Allen Lazard that could be their number 3 wide receiver. Allen Lazard is not Rome Odunze. I understand that. However, I think, you could address other needs at the moment. And with that being said, Brock Bowers could be an interesting selection. But as of right now, I'm going to play into the rumors. And again, this is going to be the craziest trade of the mock. So brace yourself. I'm going to have the New York Jets trading down with a team that did already trade down. I'm going to have the New York Jets trading down a couple spots to pick up an extra second, which at the moment, the Jets currently don't have a second round pick. And again, trust me, it's going to work out for them here in the long run. I'm going to have them trading down with the Cardinals. The Cardinals will give them 13 and let's say 44, the 2 picks that they traded down with the Las Vegas Raiders. The Cardinals trade up. They get their number 1 wide receiver. The last time that we've seen them have a number 1 wide receiver was when they had DeAndre Hopkins. And when that team had DeAndre Hopkins, when Kyler was healthy, this team dominated, right? They were 8-0 at one point. Of course, they had some other talented weapons, of course. But that is, again, the craziest trade of the mock. But again, I think the Jets, their biggest need right now is tackle, and they're going to address that at 13. So just let it play out before you get mad at me and run to the comments. At number 11, the Chargers are up here, and of course, they have a guy, perfect fit, fall into their laps. They could go Taliese Fuaga. Interesting selection, right? I think that's definitely, something that they could attack here at number 11. You could go with a couple different guys. But I think Brock Bowers is a very interesting selection, and I think at pick 23, you can still get one of these talented guards or tackles down the board, so you can still address multiple needs. I think getting a number 1 weapon for your quarterback in Justin Herbert is huge. So we're going to address your weapons and your offensive line in this mock, and I think it starts with Brock Bowers, a guy that can work in the intermediate and underneath, just be a safety blanket for Justin Herbert. So down the board, you can take a shot on a guy that can stretch the field. So I think Justin Herbert and Brock Bowers, instant connection from day one, and you can use them in a variety of different ways, especially in a Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman scheme. At number 12, the Denver Broncos. They're in an interesting position, right? As you see here, they only have 1 pick in the first 2 rounds, and their quarterbacks, the top 4 guys, are off the board. So I think the Broncos are looking at it like, okay, it's a little bit too early for a guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix. Let's go down, let's trade down, and let's trade down with a team that desperately needs some defensive backfield help. So I think the Broncos, again, Amir and I, we've talked about this trade down scenario, but the Broncos trade down 10 spots with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles trade a first and a late second. They trade up and get who they believe can be the cornerback 1 for them for the next 10 or so years. Of course, CJ Gardner, they re-signed him, but you can use him in a variety of different ways. He can slide back to safety like he was playing for Detroit, and you can now have your number 1 cornerback, a rumor, they love this guy, in Quinion Mitchell. I promise, it's been a crazy first 12 picks, but it's going to kind of mellow out now. I promise you guys. That is, I think, the last trade here in this mock. But again, we've had 4 trades in the first 12 picks. Last year, we had 6 trades in the first round. So I'm not saying that this is, going to exactly happen, but it's definitely possible, right? And that's all we're going to be exploring here in today's video. For the Eagles, you trade up for your number 1 corner. The Broncos, you trade down, and hey, you can take your quarterback at 22. That is a little bit more reasonable, and you get a second round pick in return. I think it's a win-win for both teams. For the pick, for the Jets at number 13, you're now hearing, hey, Taliese Fuaga is still here. The guy I would have taken for you at pick a 10. You trade down, you get an extra second round pick, and you still get the right tackle. That again, Tyron Smith is on the left side, Morgan Moses on the right side. Both guys are old and they're brittle, right? Both guys don't have the greatest track of history. So I think, hey, worst case scenario, Taliese Fuaga can slide inside. He's big enough, he's athletic enough, and he can play that right guard position. Or, if, hey, one of these guys just, Tyron Smith or Morgan Moses, if they aren't healthy, you have a tackle that can play both sides. Taliese Fuaga, amazing pickup for him. You don't get Rome Odunze, you don't get Brock Bowers, but you get an extra second round pick, which you can get another weapon, and you get a tackle here. So I think, again, win-win scenario for the Jets. At number 14, the New Orleans Saints are up, and they're just an old school team, right? They're either going to take an edge or a tackle, and I think they take the flyer on a guy like Olu Fashanu, a guy that is getting a lot of prospect fatigue at the moment from the general media. But I think at 14, it makes a lot of sense for the Saints, especially with their aging offensive line. At 15, we're going to keep it chalk. The Colts get Terrion Arnold. Again, it could be the cornerback one in the class, and it addresses a big need for the Colts. They haven't had a cornerback one in a long time, at least a boundary corner back one, right? We know Kenny Moore plays primarily in the slot, and he's even taken a little bit of a step back, so you need that boundary corner. Terrion Arnold can be that, even with his inexperience. Then the Seattle Seahawks are up, and I think, hey, Jared Verse would be an amazing pick for them. JC Latham would be an amazing pick for them. But I think this is a team that does need a lot of help, especially in the interior offensive line. So I'm going to go out there. I'm going to give them a tackle that is in state. So, of course, plays into a storyline of, right? Teams like to grab guys that are in state at the collegiate level. And a guy that can play just multiple offensive positions. I've seen some guys go as far as saying that this guy can play center at the next level. And Troy Fautanu, I don't know. I'm not going to go that far and say that. So don't quote me on that, right? But I think he can play guard, and I think he can play tackle. So he addresses really any need the Seahawks have on that brittle offensive line. For the Jaguars at 17, again, we're going to keep it relatively simple. I'm going to go with Jackson Powers Johnson. Again, this team needs a tackle. Well, they need some offensive line help, really, because you got to keep Sunshine up and upright, so he can be as great as he once was here in the NFL. And I think Jackson Powers could be your franchise, Jason Kelce level center for this team moving forward, especially if they want to start leaning on the run more in 2024. Jackson Powers is a good start to that because he's tremendous in the pass and the run. For the Bengals at 18, of course, they need some tackle help. And I think JC Latham, right tackle there out of Alabama. But, of course, he can play the left side if need be. I think great pickup there for the Cincinnati Bengals. For the Rams here at 19, you lost Aaron Donald, and you have to address it. How do you address it, though? Is it Byron Murphy? Is it Johnny Newton? Is it Jared Verse? Johnny Newton and Byron Murphy make a little bit more sense to me. However, I think the untapped potential and just, again, the talent ability of Jared Verse, his game-wrecking ability, goes here at number 19 to the LA Rams. I think that's a huge pickup for them. For the Steelers at 20, I'm going to go here at the tackle position with maybe you can argue that, hey, there's a drop-off after Amarius Mims, but a guy that Daniel Jeremiah said looked like Thanos on the field. A guy that's 6'8". Of course, he has a little bit of injury concerns there in his ankles, but anybody in the world that's 6'7", 6'8" is going to have lower body concerns. But I think for the Steelers, if he can stay healthy, of course, as a Browns fan, I hate to admit it, but it's a great fit there for the Steelers, especially if they lean on the run. For the Miami Dolphins, you lost Byron Murphy. Or I kind of gave it away there. You lost Christian Wilkins. Let's go replace him. And I think Byron Murphy is a perfect replacement from day one here for the Miami Dolphins. But of course, you could go Johnny Newton as well. I think they're 1A, 1B in this class. It all just depends on who you prefer. But I think Byron Murphy reminds them a lot of Christian Wilkins, more so than Johnny Newton. And I think, of course, that's your day one replacement, especially on a defensive line that is going to need a lot of help. And we're going to address that in the second round as well. For the Broncos, hey, you traded down, right? This is your quarterback here at 22. Hear me out. And of course, we'll dive into it here in the second round. But in the second round, you traded down to pick 53, or you got an extra pick in pick 53. I don't think from now until then, of course, some crazy things have happened. And in real life, I'm sure that, the Packers will draft Michael Penix Jr., right? A team that doesn't need one. But I think at pick 53, one of your quarterbacks will still be there. So, again, this is best case scenario for the Broncos and Sean Payton. I think you're in a situation now where you can go out here and grab a Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins, or one of these other talented defensive options. I think, hey, in a division where you got Patrick Mahomes, when you got now Jaden Daniels, a mobile quarterback, and Justin Herbert, you need someone to put pressure on the quarterback. And of course, this team got rid of Bradley Chubb last year. They need an edge rusher, and I think Chop Robinson to them out of Penn State is a huge pickup here. For the Chargers, you traded down, you got Brock Bowers, and you also got pick 23. So what are we going to do with this pick 23? Well, the top tier tackles are off the board, but I think there is a guy that brings a lot of flexibility. Graham Barton, to me, can play anywhere on the offensive line. Quite literally anywhere. Of course, the Chargers don't need a left tackle because they have Rashawn Slater, but this is a team that clearly their identity is going to be running the football. So I think Graham Barton, either at the right guard or at the right tackle. I know he played on the left side in college, but hey, if you want him at the left tackle or left guard spot, wherever you want to plug and play him, I think is huge. And of course, you get Brock Bowers and Graham Barton, two guys that fit the identity of Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh. And of course, you're going to be a running football team. You got two guys that can help you do that. For the Dallas Cowboys here at pick number 24, they're just kind of in a best player scenario situation. I know I flirted with the idea of trading down. Maybe they just go with Nate Wiggins or Cooper DeJean, but I think they're happy with their secondary. They could grab a tackle down the board. So to me, you go best player scenario and you get a true number 2 next to CeeDee Lamb and by Brian Thomas Jr. As a fantasy football fanatic, I'm not happy about this because CeeDee Lamb could be the number 1 pick next year. But I think for the Cowboy fans, right, in your future as far as winning a Super Bowl, I think getting that true number 2, a player that right now could be arguably better than Brandon Cooks, right, and Brian Thomas Jr., would be huge next to CeeDee Lamb, and it really opens up this offense, which seems like it's kind of going to be like a last dance kind of year in Dallas. For Green Bay here, we'll pick up the pace here. I think they picked Nate Wiggins. Of course, a huge schematic fit. Everybody runs the Fangio 6 defense, and he's the best zone cornerback in the class. He goes here to Green Bay. Of course, he's super fast as well. Fits right next there to Jaire Alexander. And now they have a great secondary where, in a division when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown's, when you have the talented, loaded roster of Minnesota and their pass receiving options. And of course, the Bears now have Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. You're in a division where you need the defensive back help, and you get Nate Wiggins next to Jaire Alexander. For the Tampa Bay Bucks, I've had Chop Robinson as a shoo-in for them in all of my mock drafts, but he's off the board. So do we go with Cooper DeJean? Cooper DeJean, I think, could have a better career at the next level than Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think he probably is the better overall prospect, but Kool-Aid McKinstry, I think, fits Todd Bowles and his man-to-man scheme a little bit better. And I think, hey, Kool-Aid McKinstry was once the number 1 consensus quarterback in this class. If you go back a year ago, Kool-Aid was a consensus top 5 pick in this class. But, of course, some injuries got in his way, and Terrion Arnold came onto the scene and really outplayed him last year, but he still falls here to 26. He's in a winning organization, at least as of the last couple of years. And of course, Todd Bowles, I think, can get the best out of him in that defensive-minded scheme. At 27, the Arizona Cardinals are here, and hey, they could go Cooper DeJean as well, but I think we can address their defensive back needs down the board just a little bit. So I think, hey, Johnny Newton. I love Johnny Newton. I think it's an absolute steal here at 27. And if you're the Cardinals, you have Rome Odunze, a number 1 wide receiver, and you have Johnny Newton. I think 2 guys that could be captains on their sides of the ball, and they could just be huge for you as far as winning football games. At pick 28, the Buffalo Bills here, they would have loved Johnny Newton, but I think they're in the situation where they can address cornerback, get a Cooper DeJean, or they can get fun and they can get fancy and address the receiver position. So, Bills fans, if you're in the comments, let me know what receiver you prefer here. Is it Troy Franklin, Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy? Really, to me, it came down to A.D. Mitchell, and it came down to Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman, for the simple fact that he just has the most potential maybe out of all of these guys here on the board. And for that reason, I think, hey, the Bills look into the draft combine and they're like, okay, we're getting a 6'3", shredded receiver that, can run with the best of them on field, right? And we know that he's just a freak on the football field. I think you get a Keon Coleman, take a shot on him here in this offense, and at the very worst, he can be a Gabe Davis replacement. But of course, with the potential that Keon Coleman has, I could see him being much, much more. And if you get much, much more out of him, even though this team is a much more run-focused team now, at least as the second half of last year, you have Stephon Diggs and Keon Coleman. If you can get that extra level from him, this team is going to be right back to be a scary Super Bowl contender. For the Lions here, 29 to wrap up the first round, I think they need an edge rusher, and I think Darius Robinson fits the mold for them. For the Ravens at pick 30, to me, it came down to the cornerbacks, man. It came down to Cooper DeJean, Ennis Rakenstraw, of course, out of Missouri, and Kamari Lassiter. This might be a shock, but again, I think it was either Ennis Rakenstraw or Kamari Lassiter fitting in with the Baltimore Ravens scheme. I think Lassiter is just a little bit better than Rakenstraw. But again, if you want to go Rakenstraw, if you want to go Cooper DeJean, I'm not going to fight you too hard. But again, they need a cornerback too next to Marlon Humphrey, who had some injury concerns last year. And I think Lassiter fits the mold pretty well there. And again, he's that in-your-face man-to-man corner that the Ravens always seem to have. At 31, the Niners are up here. And, I think, hey, they could also go Cooper DeJean. Let me know where you guys think Cooper DeJean is going to go. Of course, I always see the typical I see the typical Philly and Green Bay spots. Great landing spots, right? He could also go there. I just don't know exactly where he falls in my mock draft, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, I'm sure. But the Niners are up here. Trent Williams, it's going to be his last year. You need a guy to replace him, and a guy that's a little bit raw at the moment in Tyler Guyton. But again, you learn from the best left tackle in the game. It's never a bad way to go. He'll be ready for Brock Purdy to protect him here in about a year's time. For the Kansas City Chiefs here at pick 32, they need a receiver. They could also go Cooper DeJean, right? But I think I'm going to play it safe here, get the offensive weapon that's much needed, and a guy that could take over from Marquise Brown if he moves on in 2025. I'm going to go get A.D. Mitchell, right? So now you have an offense that you have A.D. Mitchell, Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown in the receiving room, and then you got Travis Kelce with Pacheco taking another step. I think it's huge for Kansas City. I wouldn't mind an offensive guard play there. Maybe a Zach Frazier would be huge up front, of course, next to Creed Humphrey. But I think at the moment they're set there. And of course, let's take a flyer on a guy like A.D. Mitchell. For the Carolina Panthers in round number 2, who are they going to go? I think, hey, they're in a position where they need to go best player available. And at this point, it is Cooper DeJean, right? Whether if he's a schematic fit or not, I think pairing him next to J.C. Horn and, of course, some of these other guys in this defensive backfield is huge. They also lost guys like Jeremy Chinn this past, off season. So I think getting a Cooper DeJean that, if he's a safety at the next level, hey, he's your next Jeremy Chinn. He tackles very well. He has a knack for the ball, and he just plays the game the right way, not to be stereotypical. But Cooper DeJean, I think, falling here to the Panthers is huge for them. And hey, they could have had the steal of the draft here in Cooper DeJean. At pick 34, the Patriots need a quarterback. And to me, as of late, I think Michael Penix has gone over Bo Nix. And I think Michael Penix with Marvin Harrison Jr., I think you're set because Michael Penix, hey, look, the Patriots need a quarterback from day one. I know that they're saying Jacoby Brissett's going to start from day one, whether if he is or not, right? It might just be 4 or 5 weeks. You have Michael Penix. He's a pro-ready quarterback, so if Brissett is terrible from day one, you don't have to throw a quarterback in there that might not be ready for the spotlight. You can throw Michael Penix in. He's the most pro-ready quarterback, arguably, at the moment. At least he has the most experience under his belt. And him with Marvin Harrison, with all of these other mediocre wide receivers that they have, I just think when you have an offense now with an okay offensive line, you have Ramondre Stevenson, you got Marvin Harrison, Demario Douglas on the outside. I think it's you're putting your offense in the right direction is what I'm going to finish that off with. But I think the Patriots, you don't get Jaden Daniels, but you still get Marvin Harrison and Michael Penix Jr. For the Cardinals here at 35, of course, as of right now, you've addressed both sides of the ball. You got Rome Odunze, you got Jerzon Newton. Well, hey, let's go out there and protect our quarterback. And Jordan Morgan's a good pick, right? But I think a guy that is just a little bit better than Jordan Morgan, and of course, Sumatia, is Zach Frazier. I love Zach Frazier there for the Cardinals. You get an offensive line help, you get defensive front help, and you also get your number one wide receiver in Roma Dunze. I think the Cardinals come away with these first two rounds as huge winners. For the Commanders here at 36, they need offensive tackle help. Of course, Sam Howell, whether if he was good or not, we don't know because he didn't have a chance back there. The most sacked quarterback in the NFL last year. And of course, getting offensive line help for your now Drake May as your quarterback is a huge for your team. So Jordan Morgan, he might not be the best tackle on the board, but of course he could be a great addition going forward. The Chargers are back up here. I spoiled it earlier. If you caught on to my context clues, I said you need a field stretcher. Right now, Josh Palmer, as much as I love him, he's not a number one wide receiver. He's not even a number two on a championship level team, to be honest with you. But you have Brock Bowers, you have Graham Barton. I think you're in a situation where you can address either a cornerback need, which is very much needed at this point. I think Ennis Rakenstraw is definitely in the conversation. But I say, hey, you have Justin Herbert. He's still a talented quarterback. You need a guy that can, stretch the field, open up the field for guys like Josh Palmer and Brock Bowers. And I think that guy is Xavier Worthy. Of course, you can take a shot on him, but shout out to Xavier Worthy. I think we've already kind of forgotten that, hey, this dude is the fastest man in football history. Statistically wise, he is the fastest ever. We're going to have to see. But I mean, hey, if he can be any resemblance of a Jalen Waddle or a Tyreek Hill level player with that speed and ability for this Chargers offense, that's huge, especially now because you got Graham Barton up front or on the outside. You got Brock Bowers and Xavier Worthy. This Chargers offense, you lost a lot, but you gained a lot here in this 2-round mock draft. For the Titans here, you got Joe Alt. Where do we want to go? You could go receiver. Of course, receiver is always in question with guys like Ladd McConkey. You could go Ennis Rakenstraw, but you brought in Chidobe Awuzie. You got L'Jarius Sneed. You don't really need a cornerback at the moment. So let's get fun. I think you lost Kevin Byard, right? I think it was last year or the year before. You need a guy that can come in from day one and be that cornerback, that voice, that captain on the back end of your defense. And to me, the best safety in this class is Cameron Kinchens. So you walk out of this class, or you walk out of these first two rounds with your captain on defense. Arguably, of course, Al Shahir is still there for Tennessee. But you walk out with, and Jeffrey Simmons, of course, but you walk out at least with the captain of that secondary that desperately needs attention. And of course, you already addressed the cornerback situation. So you have now in that secondary, you have L'Jarius Sneed, Chidobe Awuzie, and Cameron Kinchens in the backfield. The AFC South, man, I'll say this. If the Titans walk out with these two guys, I'm going to have to start reevaluating where I think they can finish in 2024. For the Panthers here, they took best player available in Cooper DeJean here at pick 39. And hey, I like the Tyler Nubin pick here for him because they do need a safety. But I think I'm going to land on a guy that, again, plays the game the right way. But he's going to be your Adam Thielen replacement in Ladd McConkey. Last year, Bryce Young, of course, he did show a lot of flashes. But when a lot of his low moments came was because he was forcing the ball in situations where he shouldn't have been forcing the ball. However, the two biggest things is he didn't have protection last year, and he didn't he didn't have any separation from his receiving core. So go out there and get maybe the best separator in the class in Ladd McConkey, a guy that can work in those intermediate ranges. And of course, Bryce Young doesn't have to push the ball down the field because he doesn't have the biggest arm anyway. So you can go get Drew Brees' Michael Thomas right here in Ladd McConkey. I think it's a huge addition. So you address the cornerback needs, and you also get Ladd McConkey, two guys that are very underrated. And Ladd McConkey could be huge for the Panthers going forward. I think they walk away pretty happy. For the Commanders, you have Jordan Morgan, you have Drake May. Which way do we want to go now? I think, hey, you addressed your cornerback needs last year, getting a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, but you still need help. Of course, Kendall Fuller is okay, but he's still on the market. You don't know if you're going to bring him back. I think you go out there and get Ennis Rakenstraw, a guy that has fell to pick 40 in your laps, a man-to-man in your face corner. And of course, he could be the 1A, 1B situation there to Emmanuel Forbes on the outsides. And you're in a division where you've played the Eagles, you play the Cowboys, who now have Brian Thomas as well. You're in a division with a lot of stacked receiver rooms. Getting Rakenstraw, I think, again, a huge addition from day one. For the Packers here at pick 40, One, you need tackle help, right? Point blank period. You could go Troy Franklin just for the best player available, situation that you're in. But I think getting Kingsley Sumatia, right? He can step in and be that next David Bakhtiari. Maybe not to that level, but he can play. He can play in the void of David Bakhtiari and be that left tackle for Jordan Love, because this is the offensive line that had the most combinations last year for their young quarterback. So let's make Jordan Love's life a little bit easier and get him Kingsley Sumatia. At pick 42, the Texans, of course, they traded out of the first round, but they're at pick 42 here, and why don't you look at that? A guy that some people had him taken, at pick 23 anyway. And Troy Franklin falls all the way to them here about 20 picks later. And of course, he can step in and be the number 2 wide receiver until Tank Dell returns. But of course, he could just be a great field stretcher for this Houston Texans offense. For the Falcons here at 43, of course, we addressed their defensive front with Dallas Turner. They could go Tyler Nubin. I love the Tyler Nubin pick here. Edgerrin Cooper, again, another guy that could fit the mold for the Atlanta Falcons defense. But let's go out there. Grady Jarrett's getting a little bit older, right? He's getting a little bit older. And of course, Raheem Morris is a defensive guy. Let's go out there in a division where you have teams that like to play it safe and run the ball. Let's go out there and keep addressing this defensive front. T'Vondre Sweat, dude, he's such just a space occupier, right? He's going to take 2 guys on the opposing team's defensive front. And then you had Dallas Turner with his athletic ability off the edge. I think that's huge for Atlanta in a division where you can really get after the passer. For the Jets here at 44, you traded down, you got Taliese Fuaga, but also a second-round pick. Who is that second-round pick? Who could possibly be a game changer defensively on a defense that, again, is stacked defensively? You don't need a defensive player here, but you got Taliese Fuaga. And hey, the receivers, I think it's a little bit early for Legette, for Roman Wilson. I think it's a little bit early, but again, I think as of right now, you're happy with your offense. Let's go out there and get your next Jamal Adams. And to me, that's Tyler Nubin, arguably the number 1 safety in the class. Really just a guy that is super, super talented. And again, I know the Jets don't need safety or defensive back help at this point, but you go get a guy that could just be a true playmaker and difference maker from day one. And if I'm not mistaken, they actually do need a safety. So Tyler Nubin can step in and be that safety for this Jets defense. For the Saints here, you got Olu Fashanu. Let's go out there and continue being the old school team that the Saints are. They like to draft edges and they like to draft tackles. And Chris Bray as well. You could go Braylon Trice as well. Of course, a guy that definitely is in the conversation. Braylon Trice, actually, do we want to go? I'll go with Braswell, right? But of course, Braylon Trice is definitely an interesting selection at this point in time. For the Colts here, we know you have Anthony Richardson coming back. You need a secondary wide receiver because, hey, Michael Pittman is great, right? He had a breakout year last year, but you need some help around him. You need another guy that can create some separation. Josh Downs is amazing, right? He can play the boundary, but you're missing that slot receiver. Who can that slot receiver be? And who's the guy that has a connection with Anthony Richardson? That's Ricky Pearsall. Again, it might be a bit of a reach, but again, in the second round, you want to start getting players schematic fits. You want to get guys that your quarterback wants. And I think Anthony Richardson might put in a word, say, hey, let me go get Ricky Pearsall, a guy that is just, he's bound to succeed at the next level. He does everything so well, whether run blocking, catching the ball, running routes. He does everything so well. And again, I might be biased as a Gators fan, but I like Ricky Pearsall's potential at the next level. And I think, of course, getting a guy that already has, getting a quarterback to pair with them, that they already have a connection, I think is huge for both sides of the coin. For the Giants here at 47, you got Malik Nabers, and I think at this point, hey, you don't know who's going to be this linebacker unit next year. Of course, you need some defensive help in general. TJ Tampa, I think TJ Tampa is a huge pick. You could also go offensive line help, but I think there's kind of a teardrop at the moment. To me, you need a linebacker, and my number 1 linebacker on the board is Peyton Wilson, a true game changer. The only worry about him is his medicals. But I think, hey, if you're the Giants, you come away with Peyton Wilson, a true sideline-to-sideline linebacker. He's going to fit perfectly in this division where you need linebacker play against these talented offenses. And then you also come away with Malik Nabers, I think there's steps in the right direction. And of course, Daboll is a defensive coach, so he will get the most out of a guy like Peyton Wilson. Next up is the Jaguars here. You got JPJ in the first round, of course, addressing the offensive line for a guy like Sunshine. But you're here again, here at 48. You still need some defensive back help. That is obvious, right? And to me, the best cornerback on the board, and I think there is a bit of a teardrop off after TJ Tampa, but I like TJ Tampa here, a guy that has progressed each and every year in his collegiate career. And last year we saw, obviously, the best version of TJ Tampa. If we can get that version and we can continue to see him progress at this level, he can really turn into an underrated pick here in the second round. At 49 for the Cincinnati Bengals, J.C. Latham was the first pick. Now I think they need some defensive line help. You lost DJ Reader, of course, here in the offseason. And hey, there's a couple guys on the board. You could go Chris Jenkins, a guy that's relatively close to home here. You could go with an edge rusher here in a guy like Braylon Trice, a guy that I think also could slide inside for the Cincinnati Bengals. Definitely interesting. But Brandon Fisk, I think, could make the most sense. He's very twitchy, a complete different player than a guy like DJ Reader. But again, a guy that brings you a different identity defensively. So it brings you a different look. And I think if you're the Bengals, you address your front seven in Brandon Fisk, and you also get a guy in J.C. Latham. So I think, hey, you walk away getting the necessities. It's not the sexy picks, but you get the necessities here for a team that's trying to get back into the Super Bowl picture. For the Philadelphia Eagles, you traded up, you got aggressive, you got your cornerback one, and hey, you're here at pick at 50. And I think you need a linebacker. And I think, because you took a flyer on Shaquille Leonard last year, it was not the same guy. And of course, you lost some defensive players along the way. I think your defensive line is okay at the moment. So let's go out there and get a linebacker. And I think the best linebacker available at this point is Edgerrin Cooper there at A&M. And again, he can be your Mike linebacker or an off-ball linebacker from day one in Philadelphia. For the Steelers at 51, Amarius Mims, I had him at 20, right? So we addressed the offensive side. I think the offensive side maybe could use another punch. Let's go out there and get a number 2 wide receiver. You traded away Deontay Johnson. Let's go out there and get an explosive guy that has a lot of potential in Xavier Legette. A guy that could be the number 2 next to George Pickens. So if he ever gets in some trouble off the field, which he probably could do, Xavier Legette could be a spot start wide receiver 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, I just think you need a number 2 wide receiver in this talented division where you need every playmaking ability that you can get. And Xavier Legette is a baby DK Metcalf. And again, Metcalf slid down the draft boards. Legette is slipping down the draft boards here. Maybe, best case scenario, he could be a DK Metcalf for the Steelers. But again, as a Browns fan, I really hope not. The Steelers have been around for too long anyway. For the Rams here at 52, of course, you got Jared Verse in the first round, and now you need kind of a cornerback here, especially because you struggled last year in your secondary. I think getting, Santa Still, out of Michigan there, being your cornerback, a good rotational cornerback piece could be big for you here, especially because the Rams are so good at developing some of these prospects, getting their flaws out of their game, really focusing on their pros. I think they can get the best version out of the cornerback out of Michigan here at pick number 52. At 53, the Broncos, they got Chop Robinson here at their pick 22. Of course, they traded down with the Eagles. And hey, like I mentioned to you guys, a lot of these teams before them didn't need a quarterback. You could argue, hey, maybe the Rams go out there and draft Bo Nix, or maybe one of these other teams go out there and draft a developmental quarterback. But I just don't think, you can make an argument for a couple different options, right? But I think in this scenario, I'm going to say the Broncos are smart. They get lucky. And hey, they go out there and get an edge rusher, and they still get Bo Nix at 53. And hey, if Bo Nix is gone at this point, you still can take a shot on a Spencer Rattler. It seems like Sean Payton is set as of this moment to get a guy like Jarrett Stidham to be their starter next year. But Bo Nix just fits that scheme beautifully. He gets the ball out on time. He's just a very progression kind of quarterback, which is what fits in Sean Payton's scheme. This is why Drew Brees was so great for so many years. I will say Drew Brees was, great besides Sean Payton, right? But they really brought the best out of each other. For the Browns here, my team, shout out to them. I wish we had a little bit either more success or, hey, we didn't have such a low pick, but we traded for a quarterback, and that is the price of a quarterback. We could go defensive line help, but again, we brought back a lot of our pieces here in the offseason. I think it really comes down to, do we want a receiver for the future, or do we want some linebacker help? To me, I think a guy that I would prefer over a guy like Roman Wilson would be a guy in Jeremiah Trotter out of Clemson, a sideline to sideline linebacker. He is an AFC North linebacker. Watch him play. He's a hard hitter. He has a knack for the ball, and he can step in and be our Sion Taki replacement from day one. So I like that for the Browns. At 55 here, the Dolphins, they drafted Byron Murphy. And hey, you could go a couple different options here. Of course, edge is definitely a big need. And I'm going to go with Braylon Trice for them. A guy that has fell down the boards here for the Miami Dolphins. But again, this is a guy that is going to address a big need. Bradley Chubb is going to be injured for a good part of the year, and so is Jalen Phillips. So they need an edge rusher. Go out there and get Braylon Trice. I like that here for the Miami Dolphins. For the Dallas Cowboys, I think this is starting to get into the range of a running back where they can maybe go with Trey Benson. I think, Trey Benson, I think, would be an interesting selection for them here. They have the offensive line, but they did lose Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott the last 2 years. They need a running back for this talented offensive line. But if, since I don't want to face the backlash, right, I'm going to go out there and address this offensive line because you did lose Tyron Smith. So I'm going to get you Pat Paul there out of Houston. And again, he's a developmental tackle. But if there's any place where you got to go to develop an offensive lineman, that's Dallas, right? So Dallas, you get Pat Paul. He can be your next Tyron Smith left tackle guy. For the Tampa Bay Bucks, you got Kool-Aid McKinstry. Where can we go outside of that? You could go interior offensive line. And in that case, I like Cooper Beebe, right? A guy that can slide in on an offensive line that has had a lot of injuries over the last year or so. But I think an edge rusher, a guy like Marshawn Kneeland, of course, out of Western Michigan, he's just a Todd Bowles guy, right? I think Todd Bowles, again, a defensive-minded coach, can get the best out of Marshawn. And of course, you get two big defensive needs filled here with, of course, the corner, or with, of course, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Marshawn Kneeland. At 58, the Packers are back up. They have Nate Wiggins, of course, getting a quarterback. They have Sumatia. And now you're kind of in a position where you can just go for talent. And I think you did bring in Xavier McKinney. Of course, big signing there out of New York. But I think you still need another safety. And I think that extra safety is going to be Javon Bullard out of Georgia. I love that. I wouldn't mind if this team took a Cam Kinchins in the early seconds. But hey, you still get a tackle, you got a corner, and now you got a safety. So again, your offense is pretty set. You just need to fine-tune that offensive line. And on the defensive side, you need some help. So I think Bullard, Nate Wiggins can really help out tremendously in that secondary. For the Houston Texans, hey, you're sitting here, and I think you're in a similar situation where you don't really need a lot of things at the moment. So let's go out there and get best player available. And I think that's Kalen Bullock. Again, these safeties are so talented, these top four guys. And for the Houston Texans now, you could arguably need a safety here in this defensive secondary. And I think Kalen Bullock, again, going to a defensive-minded coach in DeMeco Ryans, he's going to get the best out of this guy. So I think, again, Houston goes best player available. They walk away pretty happy with Troy Franklin and Kalen Bullock. For the Buffalo Bills, again, you're in a situation where you got Keon Coleman in the first round. You could go a couple different options here. Maybe you just keep going receiver in Roman Wilson, right? But I think Chris Jenkins makes a lot of sense up front. This team likes to do multiple fronts up, multiple looks up front, excuse me. And I think Chris Jenkins gives them the flexibility to do that here in Buffalo. But at 61, you are the Detroit Lions. You got Darius Robinson, an edge rusher there out of Missouri, excuse me. But hey, you can now draft a hometown guy. Again, plays into the storylines. Teams like to do that. But again, you need a number two next to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Roman Wilson can be that down the board here, a steal at pick 61. For the Baltimore Ravens, I think you're in a situation where you could go a couple of different options. You could go interior offensive line and Cooper Beebe. I like Cooper Beebe here for the Baltimore Ravens. You could go just, hey, with a receiver, right? One of these talented receivers that are left. You could take a shot on a guy like Malachi Corley or Tez Walker, of course, here down the board. And Tez Walker is actually a very interesting selection. I know he struggled recently at the Senior Bowl, and I know he struggled, and of course, in all the drills. but Tez Walker is a very talented receiver. I think it really comes down to a Cooper Beebe or a Tez Walker. And hey, you know what? Let's get fun here, right? Rashad Bateman has had some injury concerns. You lost Odell Beckham Jr. Let's take a shot on Tez Walker. We know on the field he was a good player there for North Carolina. And now you pair him up with Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, of course, King Henry now. Tez Walker, he's not going to be the number one in Baltimore, but I think that's the best case scenario for Tez Walker at the next level. For the San Francisco 49ers, it could go a lot of different routes here, right? But I think if you're the San Francisco 49ers, you could go Max Melton, right? I think this is a guy that, again, I don't think they need a cornerback, but all the reports say that they're basically locked in on Max Melton. Again, it could be smoke, but it's just a weird player down the board to be locked in on as much as San Fran says they are. So for all the reports, I'm going to buy into them, and I'm going to say Max Melton goes here to the San Francisco 49ers. Again, if it was my selection, maybe I go with a Cooper Beebe or a defensive tackle for San Francisco, saying they lost Arik Armstead. But again, all the reports say they're locked in on this dude, and I'm not going to go against all these reports because, again, it's a weird day two player to just be locked in on like they are. So Max Melton is going to be a San Francisco 49ers. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, I think it makes more sense to go and take a shot on one of those cornerbacks and develop them to be a great secondary piece next to guys like Trent McDuffie and others. But I'm going to go with the guy that I went to high school with. I went to high school with a guy in Mike Hall. Super cool dude. Of course, he has a lot of twitchiness to his game. I think he came out maybe a year early, but Mike Hall, I think here 64 goes to a winning situation. They can really develop him. And of course, he stood out there for OSU. I think if he can go and learn behind Chris Jones, and of course this talented coaching staff led by Steve Spagnuolo there for the Kansas City Chiefs, I think it's huge for a guy like Mike Hall, and of course makes that defensive line that much more dangerous. We had 4 total trades, and all of them came in the top 12 of the draft. But again, let's run through them. I had Arizona. They're in a situation where their number one wide receiver's off the board. They could go Neighbors, or they can trade down and get another receiver down the board. So they traded down. They got Rome Odunze in return for Jayden Daniels, which the Raiders, having the history that their coach does with the quarterback, they traded. Raiders got their quarterback. Arizona got their receiver. For the Chargers, they traded down. Of course, we all know this trade with Minnesota. Chargers got some, schematic fits right in Brock Bowers and Graham Barton. The Vikings got J.J. McCarthy, again, who they believe can be their franchise guy. The Jets traded down because, of course, they needed a second-round pick. So they traded down 3 spots with the Cardinals, who traded up for a receiver. The Cardinals, again, you need that number one option. You still get it there at number 10. And of course, they still had 2 or 3 second-round picks to play with. So it made sense for the Cardinals. For the Jets, maybe not so much, but I think a tackle makes the most sense for them over skill positions at this point. So you trade down, you get an extra second-round pick, who I forget who it turned into. But again, you get that extra second-round pick, and you still get Talise Fuaga. I think it's a win-win for the Jets. And for the Broncos, of course, you traded down 10 spots, getting a second-round pick, and getting your quarterback, which in this case turned out to be Bo Nix, and you got Chop Robinson. Again, I think Denver walks away happy. Philly, you still had some other picks to play with. You trade up, you get your number one corner, which you needed. And of course, that is Quinion Mitchell. So now you have Darius Slay, Quinion Mitchell, James Bradbury, and CJ Gardner back there with Reed Blankenship. I think this Eagles defensive backfield is loaded again. But that is going to do it here for Mock Draft 3.0 here for me. Of course, we've released 4 of them on the channel. But Mock Draft 3.0 for me, first 2-round mock on the channel. Let me know what you think. But without further ado, that's a lot of talking. I'll see you guys next week.